John, you're welcome to
All right.
take it away.
Hello. Welcome to our webcast today. Thanks for the introduction. My name is John Bassett. I'm GSI's Chief Information Security Officer and also a certified CISO. So today we're going to talk about SIEM or SIEM. We've heard it called both ways. We've heard it spelled SIEM, SEIM, but basically the words mean the same: security information and event management. Effectively, it's a software solution that helps organize and manage security events. It's to provide like a centralized and comprehensive view of an organization's security posture. And it does this primarily by collecting logs and security related items from various sources, your network, your servers, security appliances. It'll track things like failed login attempts, firewall alerts, configuration changes, and many other things that you have a lot of control over. Mike, would you proceed to the next slide? We're going to talk about the five business reasons that you may need a SIEM. The first one is business email compromise. And we want to start out by showing you what has happened over the last few years regarding business email compromise. 5, 6, 7 years ago, you didn't worry about it nearly as much as you do today. And it's kind of reflected in this chart as to the amount of dollars that each one of these events can cause you. A business email, people are basically your single weakest link now. It's far easier for hackers to get you to click on a link and accidentally grant your credentials or grant a cookie or some kind of way that they have quick access versus trying to break 256-bit encryption. So it's very very simple, and a SIEM can help you provide proactive security measures, give you what we've found to internally is to be quicker notification of the detection. So instead of going 2 to 3 months, you maybe go a half hour. It's easier to recover up front than it is to let somebody transcend your entire business email system, and a SIEM can help you do that. Next slide. Wait a second, you're on the next slide. Business email compromise. This kind of shows the number of incidents over time. The previous one slide had to deal with dollars, but you can see it's gone up greatly in the last few years. And the trend is growing exponentially, and I think that is the clear message here on what's happening with email. All right, next slide. So our second business reason is limited resources. Not only limited resources, but those resources can be expensive. Especially if you're in the small to mid-sized market, you don't have the resources for a SOC or a NOC, but you still have many of the needs of a larger company. Managed SIEM also refers to, we'll get a little more into that, giving access to an expert team that controls your SIEM and does the management for you so that you can concentrate on your business and things that are a little more important to you, either up front to help bridge a gap in training your own people, and or long term if you may find it's more affordable to stick with the managed team. So and the SIEM and SOC will correlate data and help. If you get an expert, that person can help you prioritize the needs. Next slide. So third reason is compliance. HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, some of the big ones, and a SIEM could very well be a requirement. GSI, for instance, is working on cybersecurity maturity certification, and SIEM is an absolute requirement of the certification. And a lot of those compliance requirements will also stipulate how many months or years of logs that you are required to store those logs. Some of them you can put into cold storage. Cold storage tends to be a little lower cost than warm storage, so you have to kind of figure out a combination of what you may need in the short term and the long term. It's a part of a good NIST or ISO 27001 practice as well. Next slide, Mike. So, this one's kind of big. You as a company may not have access to threat intelligence fast enough, or you need to establish it. And a lot of the backend SIEMs have back-end connectors to threat intelligence. What is the latest going on? What is some of the latest email domains or IP addresses that are nefarious that your threat intelligence might be a little bit behind or lagging, or maybe some of the tools you use are only CVE oriented versus zero-day type of prevention. And a SIEM will give you many of the up-to-date threat intelligence by cross-referencing many related events. So it can be a valuable tool for many different types of attacks and help with early detection. And you'll see that the slide shows you over the last few years is the average data breach life cycle from the time it happened to the time it was discovered. And then also, once you did discover it, how many days did it take you to contain it? So, SIEM hopefully can help you catch it early and maybe reduce that life cycle to a much lower cost. A SIEM may or may not be able to help you prevent a breach, but one of my CISO friends says that threat prevention is nice and great, but threat detection in a expedited manner is absolutely mandatory. The fifth one, please. Next slide. This one is more of a technical issue. That is data overload from multiple systems. If you have Microsoft Office 365, you have multiple firewalls, servers, different types of appliances, multiple cloud providers. You have many different systems, all of which have requirements, or have log capabilities. It has event capabilities. But it would be nice if you just had like a single pane of glass, so you can have all of these systems feed into your SIEM solution, and then you can define your analytics quickly and pinpoint what's important and what's not important across multiple kinds of devices, multiple different solutions in multiple locations and countries and business units. Next slide, please. So we wanted to just briefly talk about some of the SIEM types that are available to you. You can buy the software and install it on premise, assuming you have servers, assuming you have network people on premise and like to maintain control in-house. There's some advantages to that. If you need more storage, you could just buy more storage, because that's one of the disadvantages to SIEMs, is that data storage can become very expensive because the log volume can get very high if you don't spend enough time tuning it. And that's critical if you're going to go with SaaS or managed SIEM that has a SaaS backend. You do need to tune the logs. You need to spend that time up front. You should do it anyway. But the SaaS would be, a product like what GSI offers via ConnectWise through the ConnectWise SIEM. It's primarily a SaaS-based solution. That's what we're pushing, along with a managed SIEM. You may or may not have the in-house resources, but that's what we're here to offer. So that's all I really wanted to discuss today, is the upfront. And I want to now introduce you to Jason McNew from ConnectWise, and he is the principal cybersecurity solutions advisor. He's got a lot of cybersecurity experience, and he's going to go into a little bit deeper dive. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, John. I'll tell a little bit about my background to give a little bit of context here. But I've been in the tech sector since 1990s. The first job I had in tech sector was doing dial-up tech support, which you can imagine that's trench warfare. But anyways, I joined the Air Force at age 23, and within a few years, I found myself working at the White House Communications Agency, and I ended up with a Yankee White clearance, which is presidential access clearance. And then they sent me to Camp David, where I stayed for 10 years. And I was an IT staffer at Camp David. I was the help desk guy up there. So I spent a lot of years in these kind of buildings with no windows, surrounded by barbed wire and machine guns in these extreme security environments. And a little bit later on, I was a member of a small team running a multiple classification data center. In 2017, I started a small consulting practice called Stronghold Cybersecurity and worked primarily with defense industrial base. We merged that in with a local MSP in 2020. I have a master's degree in cybersecurity from Penn State, a CISSP, bachelor's degree, and a couple of associate's degrees as well. So I've been at this for a long time. And like yourself, I'm also certified information systems security professional. Next slide, please. SIEM and MDR, understanding how they complement and work with each other. Next slide. SIEM is, I think John kind of already covered this, so I don't want to spend too much time on these slides. But again, it's security information event monitoring, works by collecting log. The main problem here is that all the devices on your network generate logs: servers, routers, switches, firewalls, IoT, VoIP. And these logs are not intended to be human friendly, and they could be there could be hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of events per day, and we need to feed these things into a fusion and correlation, and so we could figure out what's going on. Think of it kind of like an AWAC plane. If you remember what an AWAC plane is, it's a 707, a Boeing 707, or it might be 737 with the disc on the top, right? And it's got the disc and the stripe, and it flies around the battlefield, and it looks at tanks, and it looks at troops, and it looks at ships, and it looks at missiles and traffic and weather condition, and all these other things. Now, maybe it just sees tanks moving. Okay, that's interesting. It's not a big deal. But if we see tanks and troops and ships moving at the same time, whoa, now we've got a problem. We might not have noticed any one of those things by itself, but that's kind of what a SIEM does. It could take a very complex environment and then distill it down into data that is for humans to take action upon. Next slide, please. So here's kind of the problem with SIEM, right? Now, people like John and I were engineers, CISSP, and we're going to say, SIEM is a critical detective and protective technology. But the problem is that it's kind of an abstraction. SIEM is kind of an abstraction. So I have a couple slides that sort of explain what it does at a high level using an analogy. Now the CFO is a decision maker, right? Last slide, go back to the last slide. The CFO is a decision maker. Your decision makers are people that sign contracts, and they say, "What does this even do?" I don't understand it because it's kind of an abstraction. And John, you alluded to this. SIEM is a detective control. It's not a protective control or preventive control. It's mainly a detective control. It's sort of like a smoke alarm. It's going to tell you that, well, something's going on, but it's not going to actually do anything about it like EDR and MDR can. And then the users, they say, well, stop cooking fish. And the reason I make that joke is because the SIEM doesn't impact the user experience at all. It doesn't make their computer faster, it doesn't make it slower. There's no blinking lights, there's no anything. So really the only people that get excited about SIEM are engineers, guys like John and myself. But the problem is you need it. You need it for compliance reasons, for insurance. You need it to protect yourself. So it's kind of our job to explain to you, to explain to people at some level so they can understand it conceptually. And that's what I'm about to do here. Next slide. So here's a blank map of the lower U.S. of the 48 U.S. states. Next slide. So imagine that we have a business in every single one. There's a lot of businesses like this. They might have an HQ or distribution or whatever in every single state. So we have one office building in each of the 50 states. Next slide. Now, so let's add 100 employees for each of this. So now we have 5,000 employees. Okay, that's a decent amount of employees to manage. So let's give every single one of these employees a physical access token or a fob. So now we have 5,000 employees with 5,000 fobs. Okay. Next slide. So let's imagine that our 50 buildings with our 100 employees each are open 24/7, 365 for whatever reason. Maybe it's, some kind of a security company or something like that. It doesn't matter. It's not that important. But click next. Next slide. So for our so what I'm trying to do here is this is what I'm describing is kind of a building access control system. That's what the fobs are for. So I'm comparing SIEM to building access control systems. And the reason I'm using building access control systems as my analogy is because I think everybody empirically kind of gets this. We've all seen these fobs, or you've had the cards, or you've badged into a building, or you've badged out. Everybody's seen one of these things or held it, or you have some notional idea of what it does. So in this particular example, and this should be fairly small in the grand scheme of things, we have 50 buildings, 5,000 employees, 24/7, 365 operations. And then let's just throw in, let's say there's 100 doors per building, okay, internal and external. And then let's say that the employee go and finance, and you have operations, you have management, maybe have engineering, and we keep the finance people in the finance areas, and the engineering people in the engineering areas, and the security people in the security areas. Uh,
Jason, I think, oh, go ahead.
that. And, how often, out of all that going on, how often would a genuine security security concern arise? Next slide. So, can we just have humans monitor all this? No, that would be impossible. Next slide. Okay, so go back to my sock slide.
Sorry, guys, we're having
a little bit of trouble here, right? Maybe if we had a SIEM, maybe if we had a functioning SIEM, we wouldn't have these problems, right?
Sorry, you need this slide, right?
No, back one more.
This one? Or
no,
okay.
Go forward. Right here. Okay. So here we have some humans sitting in a security operations center. Now imagine these screens just read lines of data of people coming and going, right? That would be completely useless. There, what you need is some type of a system to correlate and then fuse all this data and then distill it down. Out of all those, this could create hundreds of thousands of events per day easily. But how often would there be some type of an event where we actually need a person to go deal with it? How often is this actually going to happen? It's a very, very small percentage, but we still need all this data of these people coming and going. Because let's say, we find out that something got stolen and it belonged to the FBI or whoever, some important customer. And then 2 months down the road, we have an investigation. We need to go back into that building access control system. And then we could see, oh, well, who accessed engineering at what time? Who was in this room at this time? That's so a SIEM, similar to a building access control system, will take this data for us, and then it will archive it so we could go back in time and then look and see what happened. And it does this off site so that this stuff cannot be tampered with. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about anomaly detection and correlation. Next slide. So there's a lot of different, go back one. How did we end up on this one again? Okay. So there's a lot of different anomalies that SIEM can detect. Go back to the slide with the rabbit, please. So here's Dumbo. He works for the ABC Corporation. He's a custodian. Here's an interesting point about custodians, by the way. Since I worked in these high security environments, right, I would go into a building that had 1,000 people in it, and it would have hundreds of rooms, but I could only go into 3 or 4 rooms, even though I had that's the principle of least access and least privilege. Even though I had Yankee White Clearance, TSS, CI, special access programs, you're only limited to the places where you're supposed to go. This is an interesting side about custodians. The entire building has to be cleaned, right? So a custodian has to have access to everything, don't they? So you have a secure area that all the floors have to be clean, the windows have to be clean. So custodians are actually kind of an issue in high security environments. But so let's hypothetically say that Dumbo, our custodian, he lives in Texas and he cleans a building in Texas, but somebody steals Dumbo's fob and they clone it, and then they're trying to badge into a building in California. this would be something that would be an anomaly. This is definitely a problem, right? This is an example out of all those hundreds of thousands of events that happen in a 24-hour period, something that we would actually have to look at. Or let's hypothetically say that Dumbo's trying to badge into an area that he's not supposed to have access to, and he does it once, we might not care, But if Dumbo does that every day, Monday through Friday, then we're going to care, and that might be something that we need to go look at. So this is kind of my analogy for what a SIEM does. It takes this massive quantity of data, and it takes all of these mundane events that are meaningless and don't really mean anything. But when you correlate the mundane events together, or events that might seem mundane, they might bring together some type of a pattern that we have to look at. Does that, if that makes sense? Next slide. I think I already covered this slide. My apologies. Go ahead. Next one. And this shows SIEM ingesting logs from these various, and this should say how SIEM works, not how Perch works. That's my mistake. So SIEM is in the middle here, and SIEM is going to ingest logs from web applications, from cloud integration, workstations and servers, network devices, sensors that are deployed on your network, and then it's going to send all of these things into a cloud-based security operations center that's going to monitor. It's going to ingest all of these logs and then correlate them, and then it will notify a human if a human needs to take an action on something. Next slide. So here's some of the differences between SIEM and EDR and MDR. Now, SIEM is, as I mentioned before, it's a detective control. It's kind of like a fire alarm or a motion sensor. So it can detect that something's going on, but it doesn't actually do anything about it. Now, EDR is endpoint detection and response, and EDR and MDR are basically next generation antivirus. Now, EDR being endpoint detection and response. Next slide, please. So I'm going to get a little bit more into EDR and MDR, but I'm going to talk about old school legacy antivirus first. And antivirus has been around since the original incarnations of it started to appear in the 1990s. And antivirus is signature based, so it really only recognizes threats that are known. So when we say it's signature based, what that means is it's kind of a crude pattern matching technology. So you have a virus, you have some type of malicious logic, a worm, a virus, whatever it is, and then it gets set out in the wild and it does its thing, and then people report it, and then you fingerprint it, and then you document it, and then you put it into a database. So next time you see that exact fingerprint again, and it has to be precise, then it's going to take some type of an action. It's going to quarantine. So it's just really not all that sophisticated. Now, EDR and MDR, they do have pattern matching capabilities, but they also have pattern recognition capabilities. So one of the problems with antivirus is if you have a piece of malicious logic and then you take the code and then you modify it slightly and then send it back out, it's probably not going to recognize it. But that's not going to fool EDR and MDR. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. So EDR and MDR are heuristics and behavior based as well. So, and it can do pattern matching, but it also does pattern recognition. It could actually look at the code. It looks at the payload of the problematic piece of logic, and then it can analyze it and see if it thinks it's malicious, if it has malicious behavior, malicious features, and then it also looks at what this EDR is doing. Is it spawning PowerShell shells? Is it messing with the registry? Is it playing around with permissions? Is it trying to reach back to a mothership or something like that? So EDR and MDR can actually recognize that type of these types of actions and then kill and quarantine. And in addition to that, it also has literally an undo feature built into it. Again, undo damage. All of us have probably at one time delete an entire paragraph out of Word, or an entire column out of Excel. Remember 15 years ago, you're hitting Control S every 10 seconds. You write a paragraph. We don't have that problem anymore, right? Now, if you delete a column, you're like, oh, you just click the undo button, poof, it's back. It's no big deal. EDR and MDR can literally do this. And I'll throw in an analogy here. I love my analogies, but antivirus to me is kind of like old school antivirus is kind of like a car that just has crumple zones and seatbelts in it, right? And I have a car like that. It's a 40-year-old Mercedes S-Class that I bought for $850 when I was new. It was adjusted for, it's like $100,000 car adjusted for inflation. And it was the safest thing you could get at the time, but all it has is seatbelts and crumple zones. You're a safe car by the day. But EDR and MDR, now think of a modern car. You could go out and buy a Chevy or a Kia or whatever, a small sedan, and you get ABS, you get airbags, you get traction control, you'll get lane keep assist, you'll get collision avoidance, right? So a modern car, even a fairly inexpensive one, a kid runs out in front of it and you're not paying attention, can actually stop itself. The difference between antivirus and EDR really is that stark. It's that much more sophisticated. And now there's a difference between EDR and MDR. EDR is mostly automated and is much, much better than antivirus. But MDR is EDR with humans watching it 24/7, 365. So we like to see EDR on pretty much everything that has an operating system on it. And then MDR is going to go on the things where you have no tolerance. MDR costs more money than EDR, yes. But MDR is going to go on endpoints where you have no tolerance for downtime. An example of that might be if you know what ERP is, enterprise resource planning. And enterprise resource planning are the computers that run factories, that run production lines. And I remember I had an engineering teacher back in the 90s. He told me he worked for Owens Corning, and when the line was down, the company was losing $100,000 per minute. So that's something you have no tolerance for risk for it being down. But or if you're e-commerce and you're buying and selling things, every business has something that you have no tolerance for risk. So you do your crown jewels analysis, and then you look at the things where we have no tolerance for risk with this. And we're going to put MDR on those things. We'll put EDR and everything else. Next slide, please. I got ahead of myself. I kind of already covered this, but legacy antivirus, it's just simply no match. Click next. And then click next a couple times until we have the 4 squares here. This is sort of an engineering level slide. I won't spend too much. I already covered this, but these are the things that EDR and MDR do: real-time file analysis, active code analysis, remediation. And here's the greatest thing about EDR. EDR can detect and crush a zero-day exploit. And a zero-day exploit is something that's never been seen in the wild. Antivirus cannot do this. And the best example of this that I could think of, you remember WannaCry a couple of years ago, and that was one nasty critter. That was a piece of malicious logic. That was weapons grade malicious logic that was developed by the NSA, and it got leaked somehow. And then North Korea got a hold of this thing, and they wrapped it in a worm. And a worm is something that can propagate from system to system without any human interaction. It's extremely nasty. And then they attached a ransomware function to it, which was probably intended to confuse people. They didn't make any money off of it, but boy, I'll tell you, if a different threat actor had done that correctly, it could have made an absolute pile of money off of this thing. Not that I'm endorsing that, but and they dumped the thing on Europe first, and it started to spread in Europe. But machines that had Sentinel-1 on them at this time, now this had never been seen before, was developed by the NSA. Zero-day exploit, extremely nasty, and machines that had Sentinel-1 on it crushed it day one because they looked at what it doesn't just look at the payload, it looks at what this thing is trying to do on the machine. It crushed it day one. And this is the kind of technology that is now available to the small and mid-sized business space that just was not available as recently as 6 or 7 years ago. Next slide. And then we're back to the MC.
Sorry. Yes.
MC Hammer.
I was going to say, first of all, I want to apologize to everybody. My internet has been, this sounds like my grandmother making an excuse, but my internet, I've never had internet issues until just now. So I really appreciate your patience for the slide. Every time I come back in, it would pop off. So we are at the Q&A section of our
Hey boy, we went fast.
presentation.
I think
we blew through it a little bit.
Yeah, we just talked really fast.
Well, and we still have participants, so that's important. But we did get some questions too. So I've got one simple one, and it's real specific. But John, you brought up earlier about the cost of a ransomware attack being, I think it was $5 million or in 2023. Is that 5 billion based on the ransom they asked for, or drop production time?
No, that's all
All
inclusive.
inclusive.
That's
So
ransomware.
yeah,
Ransomware payments, people, software you may have to buy. Yeah, it's a all in cost.
If you're
well,
not properly insured and that
oh
happens, so
sure,
that
yeah.
this is as bad as a building fire or a major flood, like what's going on in Vermont right now. It's horrendous. This a ransomware attack can put you out of business permanently. And since we kind of went quick and we have a couple minutes I'm going to touch base on
Oh yeah,
insurance
go ahead.
very quickly, because um, no matter what, we could do all of the right things. And corollary to that is you could be the best driver in the world. I haven't gotten in an accident in, I don't know, 20 years now, but 3-4 weeks ago, I was up in New Jersey and I ran a red light. I almost ran a red light and almost caused an accident. Holy cow. People make mistakes and things happen. I think statistically, drivers get in an accident every 13 years or something like that. And you have storms that hit the coast. So these things are kind of repeatable. And I'll get into insurance in a minute here. But if you're operating an information system, it's 24/7, 365. And to me, this is like buying a house on the coast of Florida. I know what's going to happen. Eventually, you're going to get a storm. And hopefully, it's just going to be a tropical storm, or maybe it'll be a Cat 1, but it could be a Cat 3 or Cat 5. But if you buy a house in that part of the world, the Gulf Coast, that's going to happen eventually. Eventually, there's going to be a storm. And operating a computer information system, in my mind, is exactly the same thing. We need to approach it with that same mindset. So we need to get ready in advance. And insurance is part of one of those things. And even if we do all of the right things, we could have all the right detective and protective technologies. We could have the right policies and procedures. We could have the right people in the right places. Hackers only have to be right once. We have to be right every single time. They only have to be right once. So at any given time, you have some new 0-day exploit, like that WannaCry thing I was talking about. That was a nasty bug, and not everybody had everything they needed in place. And even if you're doing all the right things, you can get through anyway. But insurance, cybersecurity insurance is going to be the thing, and business insurance too, is going to be the things that could finally stopgap this in case we did all the right things, but we had a bad outcome anyway. But I'm going to take a quick second and talk about cyber security insurance. And when you're buying cybersecurity insurance, one of the things that drives me crazy about, I almost wish we didn't call it insurance. I kind of wish it was called cybersecurity risk transference. Because we've all bought insurance, all of us, we're all adults. You've bought car insurance, you've bought life insurance, you've bought homeowners insurance, and you get this checklist, right? And you're like, no, I don't smoke. The roof is 25 years old. The car has active restraints or whatever, right? And then you fill out 10 or 20 questions, and the insurance companies have a really good idea what the attendance risks are, and then they write you a policy. Cybersecurity insurance is not like this. This is a new product offering. Insurance has been around forever. Think of Lloyd's of London and the East India Trading Company. It's been around forever. So they have all this actuarial data. So when you buy insurance for a house or medical insurance or life insurance, they have a very, very good idea what they're doing. But the cybersecurity insurance hasn't been around that long, and they are kind of feeling it out and they're making mistakes. So when they send you this questionnaire, and you see things that are on there, I want you to stop and read the entire thing. Pump the brakes, and you need to read the entire thing. Read all of it. Make sure you understand everything that's on it and understand exactly what they're asking for. And if there's anything on there that you don't understand, I want you to reach out to GSI and ask them, do we have this? Are we meeting this requirement? Can you explain this to me? And if you don't have exactly what they're asking for, then GSI can help you get it. And the problem is if you fill out one of these things and you don't understand exactly what you're doing, when you go to make a claim, they're notorious for denying these things because the underwriters have been losing money on this stuff. They're getting better at it, but they were losing money, and there's been a lot of litigation. So they're in the process of, they're kind of raising prices, and I think they're starting to level out, but they will deny claims if you are not doing everything you say you're doing. And it's so different than car insurance. I present live and I'll tell people, look, every single one of us, if we leave here today, if every single one of us went and drove our car into a tree, you're pretty sure the insurance company is going to pay for it. We know that they are, because that's something we're used to. But cybersecurity insurance is not like that. So my main advice with cybersecurity insurance is take a breath, pump the brakes, caveat emptor, buyer beware. Make sure you read everything, take your time, And if there's anything on there you do not understand, then reach out to a trusted advisor, a technical advisor, a GSI, and then make sure you understand. And that way we know that you're covered. And then the last point to remember is read exactly what the coverage is, because we've, auto insurance, we're so used to looking at these things. It's all 10/30, 10/100, tort, no tort, blah, blah, blah. We're all used to that. But cybersecurity insurance isn't like that. Make sure you understand the coverage, what's covered and what's not. And then remember that they don't, depend on the policy, it might not cover or probably won't cover lost revenue. And you could lose a boatload of revenue if this happens, just like if you have a fire, you could lose a lot of revenue. So you need the cybersecurity insurance, and then you may also need business insurance to cover lost revenue and business email compromise and that kind of thing. So this is a lot more complex and a lot more nuanced than other kinds of insurance that you're used to buying. So lean on GSI for help with that. And then I think we're going to talk about assessments, which is another thing that I have many things to say about.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, this is really, we figured that this is a good, this is really the only opportunity we offer, this free external vulnerability assessment and consultation. With cybersecurity, our practice, even though we have a lot of experience on the team, it's been kind of born out of working with ERPs. And so they have a lot more experience and a lot more background in working on things. And so, with before you get started with the SIM, that we have a free external vulnerability assessment and consultation. And that's John Bassett here is the same John Bassett that is on your presentation today. So you go right to the big cheese right there. You don't go through salespeople. I'm sure Bill wouldn't mind that either, but we'd love to talk to you, but you get a hold of John right away when you email him on that. So
thanks, Mike. I'll draft you too.
And yeah. I cannot possibly endorse this course of action enough. Having a cybersecurity assessment is really one of the most important things you can do for your small business, because you just don't know what you don't know. And you bring in somebody that's credentialed like myself or like John, and then look at your risks and your threats, and then kind of distill all this down to you, and then say, well, this is what you could do to reduce your risk, the most right now, and then we can come up with a plan of action and milestones to systematically reduce the risk over a period of time. And all these things have to be done. We have to balance this with operations and costs. At the White House, we had all the money that just came out of your paycheck, right? We had all the security we could possibly want for everything. But the small to mid-sized business is not like that. You do not have an unlimited budget for cybersecurity. You don't have an unlimited budget for anything. So, cybersecurity as a discipline is about managing risk, not just having policies and procedures and blinking lights and hiring the right people. It's about reducing risk in a systematic way that aligns with our business and our financial objectives.
If I could jump in for a moment, Jason, the other thing too, to point about the assessments is that cybersecurity is not cookie cutter, right? It's not a one size fits all, right? So having somebody like John and the organization at GSI, that allows them the opportunity to do an assessment, not just find the cybersecurity solutions, right, but to find the right cybersecurity solutions. They can look at the organization, the gaps and the needs, and consult with them on what it is that they need. Otherwise it would be very simple to provide cybersecurity. Everybody would just buy the same thing. Everybody would have the protection that they need. But the fact of the matter is that that's not the case. There's multiple different factors that GSI takes into consideration when they're looking at someone's cybersecurity, from SIM to EDR to whatever other services and people, processes, and tools are needed to be able to accomplish that for the organization.
And Dave, you couldn't be more right about that. The path to a secure enterprise is going to be different for every single company.
Sure.
And this would be like if you called a restoration shop and said, hey, I want to have a 67 Mustang restored. How much it's going to cost? But, well, I don't know. You got to bring it in here. We got to rip the carpets up and grind some paint off and do a compression check, and then take a look under the hood and see what's going on with this thing. I don't know. You know what I mean? And right. So you got to get in there and rip the carpet up and grind some paint off and do a compression check, and that's kind of what this assessment is going to do for you. And then once we do that, then we can have a discussion about okay, here's where we are today, and here's where you want to be, and then what is it going to take to get from here to there? And Dave, you're absolutely right there. All of them they're all completely different.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
I will break in. I do want to say
sure.
we do have. The only reason I'm interrupting you guys is because one of our questions actually is kind of dovetailing on what you're talking about, and so what type of events and logs can a SIEM collect and analyze? We talked about its capabilities over everything it could do, but what is really brass tacks going to be getting down to every day? What types of events and logs can the SIEM collect and analyze?
Depends on how
That's
you
the first
tune it.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a
Depends on
great
how you
question.
tune it. There's there's various security protocols, and you look at all these event IDs that are, particularly interesting. There's long lists of them. And by default, it's going to pick all these things up. Things like, password changes, creating accounts. There's a long list of things that it's going to do, kind of by default. So it's a little cookie cutter. There's always going to be some cookie cutter. It's
Well,
automation.
Yeah, it could, some of the cookie cutter things are like Microsoft Office 365, Azure, firewall logs, Windows system logs, Linux. So I mean, and there's even some, third party like open collector that you can configure to be like a generic, write your own custom that you can feed in as well. So there's a lot, but you're going to want to take care, in my opinion, you're going to want to take care of the low hanging fruit first. And the low hanging fruit first is your firewall logs, your Office 365 or whatever email system you're using. And then you start digging into what's most critical to your system. You have to look at your risk assessment. What are your key business systems, and start looking at those as well.
Well, and just to chime in with some of the things that you're saying, so to answer and kind of flesh out some of the parts of that question, when you look at what's happening in terms of an attack, the moment that an attack happens, for any one of the businesses or business owners that's on this call right now, what ends up happening is that you are aware of the attack when the attack happens, when the sort of payload is delivered, right? So you find out that you have assets that have been encrypted, right? Or all of a sudden somebody says to you, "Did you get my money order for the product or the service that I'm purchasing from you?" And you go, "No," and they say, "Well, I sent it to this bank, and it turns out that has nothing to do with you," right? So that's the moment. That's the aha. That's also referred to in the field as the boom. That's that moment. So where a SIEM can kind of come into play is that before that boom happens, there's something called dwell time. And with that dwell time, and you guys may have mentioned it earlier, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but with that dwell, you're going to be sitting in your system for a period of time, making adjustments and set stage.
It's worth
so
repeating,
when they're making,
Dave.
Yeah,
it's worth repeating.
Thank you.
This is worth repeating.
Thank you. So as they're setting the stage, they're doing things inside that network, changing permissions, creating backdoors, doing things so they can set up shop and do their work. A SIEM is going to help and is going to detect when those things are done, because they are not normal behaviors within the system that you have, within the network that you have, right? So this gives the ability for us to be able to see things, and GSI to be able to see things that are occurring within a network that allows the opportunity for an attack to be cut off at the knees before that boom occurs.
Yeah, once that toehold happens, once that initial intrusion happens, when they gain initial access, we need to know that now, not 6 months from now. We need to know that today or tomorrow, not 6 months from now, because 6 months from now they've erased the logs, they've deployed their payloads, and everything is ready for their attack, and then that boom comes, and the boom is when they're finally alert you to their presence because they make some type of demand or they do something. And then sometimes you never know if it's a case of exfiltration where they're there to get something. Sometimes there's not going to be a boom, and they'll just sit in there. And we've seen other cases, or I haven't seen, we've read about them. Sometimes they're doing a ransomware attack on one hand, when really the real goal is to do exfiltration. They're after your intellectual property. I remember seeing a briefing from a CISO about something that happened in his company. I think they're developing some type of software for defense, and they had a ransomware attack. But what they're really doing, that was a diversion attack, so that they could exfiltrate. And that's the scary stuff. SMBs are not normally victimized by that. SMBs typically are. It's just they're just trying to rob you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask along with that, how I certainly am familiar with cybersecurity, but nothing to the depth that you guys have. So one question is how does a SIM once it's deployed, how does it, stay updated with the latest threat intelligence and detection rules? Is it as simple as, a Mac at 2 in the morning going and getting the latest software? I mean, these threats are ongoing and they're always there. You're always getting attacked. So if it doesn't go into some sort of back end mode, how does a SIM stay updated with the latest info?
A product engineer could probably answer this a little better than I could, but it's like antivirus. It updates its signatures and its definitions or an IDS on a regular basis, And when some new threat comes out in the wild, and then the SOC catches it, they're going to write rules for that kind of stuff and then push it out to the clients.
Yeah, Jason, I think I can maybe add a little color onto your statement there. So in the instance of the Security Operations Center and SIM that we have available for you and your organizations, essentially what's happening is the Security Operations Center is constantly looking over all of the events that are coming in and analyzing them. Those events, sometimes they get alerted. And sometimes they get escalated all the way up to, hey, this is truly a indication of compromise, right? That's the big business term or the industry term for something really bad is happening. And what we do is, a part of the SOC, we have what's called our crew, or the cyber research unit. That cyber research unit is constantly looking over the alerts that are popping up, the indications of compromise that are popping up, and generating customized alerts for you and your organization. And the big differentiator here is that this is alerting specific to the small to medium-sized business across all industries. It's not just finance. It's not just healthcare. It's across all industries. So what does that relay for you guys as individuals who are assessing what to do and what GSI can do for you? And really, it's extremely tailored, customized alerting that's constantly being added to, and the same CRU alerts that are being generated today will change and be completely different 2 years from now. That's how dynamic of an industry this is. And then for those organizations who have requirements for additional threat intelligence feeds, something like an ISAC or an ISAO, information sharing and analysis centers, or information sharing and analysis organizations, right? They are constantly pushing industry-specific feeds. As well as other key players like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne has their own version of information sharing feeds. But essentially, we bring all of that information in, and then the data that we bring in, going to the previous question, we pass this alerting logic on top of that, and that's how you get these up-to-date alerts, so that you know what to do with your not only the data that's being alerted upon, but also what you can do with that information, right? Having the information is one thing. Knowing what to do with it is a completely separate task.
Earlier we were looking at the different kind of SIMs. There's software as a service, there's on-prem, but how complex is the deployment process, or is it depend on I would think on-prem? Are you going to have to buy hardware for an on-prem thing, or is it, if you're going to the cloud is it different things for different? Is it as simply just, okay, we're installing a software like an antiviral, in the fact that, it's a pretty simple process. What is the deployment process like, I guess?
Yeah, great question. So essentially the deployment process, is certainly a little bit more difficult than installing an antivirus, solution. But essentially, what we do is we install what we call a SIEM sensor. It can either be a hardware appliance or a virtual appliance that goes inside of your organization's network, and that's how we're able to start to gather all of this data. The reality of today's modern workforce is that we're not just, everything isn't on-prem anymore. We have, SaaS providers, we have hosted infrastructure, we have third parties that we do business with, right? What we do is we have either integrations or log forwarding of those integrations, or of those vendors, excuse me, to give you a view into what's happening with your, SharePoint, what's happening with that data center that's hosted in AWS, with the firewall logs that are on inside of the office today. And we aggregate all that data and then present it to you in the console. So when it comes to deployment, as long as we get the data flowing the right way, it's pretty simple. Obviously, it depends on the way that your organization is set up and the way that network topology is mapped. But from my role as a sales engineer and setting up these instances for customers, it's been there's a tricky one every once in a while, but usually it's smooth sailing.
Before we go forward here, we're getting kind of near the end, but I want to make sure we have a little bit more time to cover everything. But I did want to make sure you understand there are GSI offers a lot of educational resources in addition to these webcasts. So this webcast will be on demand. It will be up. So if you know somebody who should have been here at this one, or you wanted to share a statement from it, we're going to have this up on the website here in a couple of days and accessible from our webcast page. We have newsletters, we have YouTube channels, a lot of how-to videos, but a lot of stuff that you can see make sure the evolution of some of the subjects we're talking about is retained on our website, and that's important to us. Our website is we also have social media channels, and we invite people to participate and give us ideas to talk about, especially blogging. We have stuff we like to write about, but we have stuff that we want you guys interested in. So please, if there's any topics, send them our way. You'll also be, we've got an upcoming webcast really focusing on the software development lifecycle and how to keep that secure. So that's going to be an interesting one. And if you received emails for this, you'll receive emails for that. So that's the August 2nd at 2 p.m. And then lastly, we will send you a link for after this for feedback. And if you can provide feedback, you'll be entered to win a $25 Amazon gift card, because we appreciate that. We know in a busy day, feedback isn't always something that's top on the list. So really, we've hit the Q&A, obviously. And again, the last thing we'll add, we're giving you a free external vulnerability assessment and consultation. Reach out to John. Anybody, speaking of John, I guess, I'll give you one of the last questions. We still have a few minutes, but Patrick was talking about the deployment process, and Patrick, obviously you could chime in too, but not just deployment, but you were talking about integration after that. So you've got it, you have it deployed, but that's just the first step, right? John, do you find the devil's in the details when we're dealing with clients? What's easier, the deployment or the integration and with existing systems, or is it all kind of different no matter where you go?
It is going to be different no matter where you go, but there is some consistency to it. I'd say 75% of it's consistent and 25% of it is the variability from company to company. The upfront is, finding and making sure you have found and located all of your devices, where everything is, getting things set up. I'm assuming you're talking about SIEM setup and deployment.
Yeah.
Getting things installed and implemented, setting up some standard connectors to your, like to your email system, your, your Teams or Zoom, whatever, things like that, that are typical. But then the rest is, do you have a custom application that, would be critical for you to get that data imported into the SIM for proper analysis?
Yeah, and I was just going to say we've entered the end of the webcast, but I'd love anybody else getting in the final few minutes here, anything that you'd like to elaborate on, or just say in general about the importance and the emergence of SIM as such an important tool.
If you don't mind, I'd just like to real quick say that
Please,
in
Dave,
terms
yeah.
of, yeah. So one thing I want to say is I want to just pay my compliments to the team here at GSI for conducting this, because there was a point in time where in the small to medium-sized business community, the relationship between IT providers and them and the community wasn't like this. You guys are doing an excellent job of educating, and that really speaks to the consultative approach that GSI has. It really is something special within the marketplace. And I really want to commend you guys for, going out there to educate. And I hope that, your partners and your clients, really not only get something from this, but are able to continue to benefit from the expertise that you're bringing to the table.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and I think that's why it's important. We like to put these on the website as a webcast, because, even if, let's say, we don't hear anything from a prospect, people stumble upon this and it can help them. That's important, and that is especially this concept, getting it out there that businesses need this. It's not if you're going to get it attacked, it's when, or it's already happening every day. So just a great all around, and I really appreciate you guys' patience on the slides, but also chiming in when we needed to, because there's it's tough to put all you need in a slide. And so I really appreciate that, guys. So anybody else like to finish off here? We're just right at 3 o'clock, so we want to be mindful of time, but anything, final thoughts from anyone? Okay. Well,
We've covered it.
Yeah, we'll let everybody go. Thank you again, everybody. And you'll be getting some links from us for the Amazon gift card. So thanks again. Have a great day, everybody.